Stuka Joe here. Today we'll be taking a look at Santa Cruz 1797, designed by Iván Cáceres and published by Bellica, third generation. This is a card-driven area movement block game. So you have a combination of interesting game mechanics all in a small footprint and a game that plays in less than 2 hours. This is a regular tournament game at the Bellica Con in Badajoz. Here we see at a glance the components of the game. Let's take a closer look. The game includes an 18 by 18 inch mounted map board that shows the coastal city of Santa Cruz, surrounded by sea areas from which the British will be invading. The map has a turn record track, morale track, and also a combat round track. And this is a card-driven game, and the game includes a dedicated deck of cards for the Spanish and another one for the British. There's counters for leaders on each side and markers to denote spaces where coastal guns have been spiked. There's also a combat display. There's player aid cards printed in Spanish on one side and English on the other. And the game includes a rulebook in Spanish, but you can download the rules from Bellica third generation's website in English. And I find that the rules are well illustrated and explained. There's also cards that serve as player aids. This is an inventory of British cards, Spanish cards, the explanation of the attributes that each one of the leaders on both sides have, and also you have in Spanish on one side and English on the other a sequence of play card. There's a display for the British player to place 3 cards associated with the Cutter Fox, the Cutter Fox, and 2 of the British blocks, and where the British player holds his confusion cards until they seep into his deck. Let's take a look first at the British blocks. The British have 3 marine units. These are the elite British units in the game. The die symbol on the lower left corner denotes that these units, when they participate in combat, they add 1 extra die to the British dice that are rolled. The British also have 9 sailor units, and this is a block game. And the units begin at full strength with all 4 pips arranged on their top side. And then there's the Cutter Fox, which begins off the board at the beginning of the game, but may bring reinforcements to the British. The Spanish have 9 units. 3 of these are the lower quality volunteers, and the exclamation symbol means that whenever the British player rolls a 4 when resolving combat, these units are going to retreat no matter what the result of the combat is. The Spanish player has 3 provincial militias and 3 regular units. These are the elite Spanish units, which add 1 die whenever they participate in combat for the Spanish. We will set up the game and play a few turns so that you can get an idea of the flow of the game and what the game has to offer. First, the British player takes the Cutter Fox, and he can select 2 units, and it will be 2 sailor units. These are placed on the British display. These 2 units may arrive later during the game in the Cutter Fox. From the British deck, we separate the following cards. 3 cards that show an anchor symbol on their lower left corner. We place these cards here. These cards will arrive with the Cutter Fox. And then the 3 British confusion cards. And these cards, what they do is they use up space in a player's hand. They're completely worthless, but they start the game off the map, and they will enter the game in the British hand as the game progresses. The remaining British blocks are all set in the area here in the southeast corner of the board. We place the turn marker in the 2 o'clock space, and the morale marker in the 0 space in the middle of the morale track. And we place the combat round marker here. We will use that track whenever we resolve combat. Now, before we place the Spanish units, let's take a look at the map. The map shows the coastal city of Santa Cruz, and it has land areas. Some of these areas are color-coded, and they have cannons that can bombard British units on the sea spaces. The space in green here is the La Concepcion battery, and it's worth 3 victory points. The space in red is the San Cristobal castle, and it is the prize of the game, 6 victory points. The space in purple represents the piers. It has also cannons, and it is worth 2 victory points. And then further up north, we have the San Pedro battery, which is color-coded in yellow and worth 3 victory points. Also, we see here the town center, which is worth 2 victory points. And further inland are 2 areas that are each worth 1 victory point. Victory points are also earned at the end of the game, depending on the location of the morale marker. And when battles are resolved, the winner shifts the morale marker in his direction. So let's suppose that at the end of the game, the morale marker is in this number 1 space with the British flag. The British player will gain 1 victory point. And of course, the game is won or lost on account of victory points. Let's set up now the Spanish units, and we will rotate the map so that we have the perspective of the Spanish player when setting up the game. There are some setup restrictions. For example, at least 2 units have to begin the game in San Cristobal Castle. So we place 1 provincial militia there and a volunteer unit. At least 1 unit has to be placed at the La Concepcion battery. We place a provincial militia unit there. And 1 unit has to begin the game at the San Pedro battery. We place another provincial militia unit there. Stacking limits in this game is a maximum of 3 units per space. And now we place the remaining 5 Spanish blocks on the map. Now we shuffle both decks of cards, and we hand out 6 cards for the British and 5 cards for the Spanish player. And we're ready to go. Here we see the British hand, and here we see the Spanish initial hand. Each turn has 5 phases, and the first phase is the British naval movement phase. In this phase, the Spanish units that begin the game here in this sea zone in the corner of the map have to approach the coast and move 1 sea zone closer. Now, in this game, there is a strong current that goes from north to south, and the way that the current is recreated in the game is that units may move, if they want, to the southernmost sea zone, which is adjacent to the one they are in. So all these units, if they wanted to, they could move to this zone here, which is the southernmost zone. If they would want to move to the northernmost zone, which is this one, each unit would have to roll a 1d6 and obtain a 4 to 6 result. If it rolls a 1 to 3, it goes to the southernmost zone. Part of the British strategy in this game is to be able to threaten various areas in the Spanish defenses in order to split the defenders. And to do that, the British must have a significant force attacking the northern coast while another force attacks the southern coast. And another force should be able to take out the piers here. But notice that that particular area can only be entered from this sea zone. Here you see these anchor symbols. These symbols signify the entrance to a particular area. You cannot enter the pier area from the sea area in front of San Cristobal Castle. So the British have to allocate a significant number of units to move to the northernmost areas in order to have a shot at capturing the piers. And by capturing the piers here, they can silence the coastal batteries that will be firing at the beginning of the game in the first few turns at British units at sea. So we will be rolling off camera for each of the 10 British units, 1d6. With a 4 through 6, the unit will enter the northernmost sea area, and with a 1 to 3, the southernmost sea area. And after rolling for each unit, we see that there is a 50-50 split. 5 British units in the southernmost sea zone, and you have 2 elite Marines there, and 5 other British units, just 1 Marine unit in the northernmost sea zone. Now we move on to the Spanish coastal battery bombardment phase. The Spanish, in addition to their units, have coastal batteries which are located in the color-coded spaces. For example, you have that green space there, which is the De la Concepcion battery. And you'll see the depiction of a green die right in front of it, a green 2, and in the space that the 5 British units move, the southernmost space, we see here depictions of dice. Now in this phase, the Spanish can play cards to have his batteries fire at all units in a particular area. So if the Spanish play a bombardment card and assign it to this area, the Spanish will roll 1 die 3 times, 1 for each of the batteries in range. This is the De la Concepcion battery, this is the battery from San Cristobal, and this is the battery from the piers. And a hit is obtained if the result is equal or lower to the indicated die result there. So there's a great potential for great damage while British units are at sea. They are vulnerable, they can't fire back. But of course the Spanish have to have the bombardment card to do so. Let's take a look at the Spanish hand. We begin by noting that the Spanish draw not 1 but 2 confusion cards. So they can't do anything with these cards. They just take up space. The only way of getting rid of them is during the Spanish action phase to pass and then discard as many cards as a Spanish player wants. But we're not in the action phase yet. We're in the Spanish coastal bombardment phase. The Spanish can fire 1 bombardment with this card, which has the cannon in the lower left symbol. And we see that there's no other such card. So the Spanish will be firing their cannons, but they can only designate 1 sea area where British units are located. So we see that in this sea area, each British unit will be subjected to 3 die rolls, and there's a 1 in 2 chance with the battery from San Cristobal. And when we compare that to the other group of units, it's also 3 die rolls, but the chance is slightly less. Only 1s will hit. So the Spanish player will use this bombardment card to fire at the units in this sea area. Okay, we spread them out, and we will be rolling sequentially 3 dice, and we will be placing them here so that you can compare the die result with the required to hit roll, and we will be taking losses as we go along. So we will roll first 3 dice for the topmost Marine unit, and there was 2 1s from the La Concepcion and the Piers batteries. So that first Marine unit suffers 2 hits. So tough losses in the first couple of die rolls. So now we roll for the second Marine unit. The second Marine unit suffers 1 hit. Now we roll for the top sailor unit, and 1 hit is scored from the San Cristobal battery. Now we roll for the next sailor unit, and all batteries missed. Now we roll for the third sailor unit. 1 hit from De la Concepcion battery. And that's a total of 5 hits from Spanish batteries in 1 bombardment card. And that's a pretty hefty count in hits, but luckily for the British, the Spanish only have one bombardment card. They have no other cards. And in this phase, the Spanish could play up to 3 cards. So we place the played card here in a discard pile. Now to the British action phase, and during this phase, the Spanish player can play response and combat cards when applicable. Now, because the British units are at sea and not adjacent to a land space, there's very little they can do. They cannot play any assault cards or move cards. We see the British hand. We see an order card for movement, which cannot be played. There's a combat card that allows them to improve their chances when attacking a fortress, so that doesn't apply yet because we're not in a combat situation. And another combat card, which is an artillery card. In the back, we see assault cards, 2 assault cards, but these cannot be used to move to another sea area. The only card that can be used at this time by the British player is this card. This is El Rayo, and this allows the British to bombard one space. It can be any land space, and if it is a regular space, we roll 1 die for each Spanish unit in the space. Rolls of 5 and 6 each will cause a hit. Now, if it is a fortified space, like the color-coded spaces, only 6 will score hits. And if the British target a beach space, and here we see a beach space, as well as here, the British doesn't even have to roll. All Spanish units in that beach space are eliminated, and that's a good reason not to place any Spanish units at the beginning of the game on beach spaces. There are 2 of these El Rayo cards in the British deck. But the British will play this card to bombard the space here that has the square and has 2 Spanish units. So we will roll 1 die for each unit. 5 and 6s will score hits. But let's turn the table around so we get a look at the units from the Spanish perspective. We roll for the topmost unit, which is a volunteer unit first. The roll is a 1, and that's a miss. And now we roll for the elite regular unit, and the roll is a 6, so they suffer the loss of 1 strength point. So we rotate the unit accordingly, and we place the played card on what will be the British discard pile. The British can't play any more cards. They can't discard cards either because they actually played a card. In those action phases where a player does not play any card, he may discard any number of cards. So the last thing that the British player will do is to draw a card from the draw pile. This is another orders card, a movement card, and we place it with the other British cards. Now we go to the Spanish action phase, and the British player, when applicable, can play response and combat cards. The Spanish player has 2 confusion cards, which serve no purpose, and these other cards. This is a lost card. This is a response card. Whenever a British move card is played, the Spanish player can respond by playing this card, and it is the Spanish player that moves the British group of units. And the other card that we have is the swell card, and this is a card that will negate British combat cards during a particular combat situation. But as you can see, there's no combat right now, and there's no British group of units on land, and the Spanish have 2 of these confusion cards. So the other option that the Spanish player has is to discard cards, and the Spanish will discard both confusion cards, and for now this lost card also. And now by passing, the Spanish player can refill his hand, so he can choose 4 more cards. And here we see the cards after refilling the hand. And the last phase of the turn is where we advance the time mark, which is moved now to the 2:30 space. And we start a new turn. And we start with the British naval movement phase. Here we see the southern group, which suffered significant losses in that first bombardment. By moving here at the space in front of San Cristobal, it is venturing here murderous fire from La Concepcion, San Cristobal, and the piers. So these units may all choose to move in front of La Concepcion battery. Also further south, there's another entrance here to the town, which will take a while for the British to reach the other victory spaces. But the British may not want to have all their units concentrated for bombardment. So the British will roll for 3 units to try to enter this space here in front of La Concepcion battery. And those that fail will be entering the southernmost space. And these 2 units will automatically move into the southernmost space. And here we will have all 5 units rolling to see if they can enter the space in front of San Pedro. Those that don't will be entering this space here that has that entrance to the pier. And we will start rolling for this group first, and we will roll off camera. We see that 3 units made it to the northernmost space in front of San Pedro battery, and 2 units entered the space that will allow the units to enter the piers, unless the Spanish place some units there. Now we roll for these 3 British units that wish to enter the space in front of La Concepcion. And only 1 unit was able to enter the space in front of De La Concepcion battery. The other 2 units joined the first 2 British units that moved to the southernmost space on the map. And that's the end of the British naval movement phase. And now on to the Spanish coastal battery bombardment phase. And the Spanish, like in the last turn, had 1 bombardment card. They have 1 here, but this one has a +1 notation, meaning that the to hit ranges are increased by 1. So if the Spanish player has a 1 to roll for a hit for, let's say, the Concepcion battery, now it's a 1 to 2 chance of hitting. So let's take a look at the situation on the map. There's a big temptation to fire into this space here that has 4 British units, but the problem is there's only 1 battery in range, so it would be just 1 die for each unit. On the other hand, in this particular space here, there's only 2 units, but we would roll 3 dice here, and the to hit numbers would be increased. It would be 3, 3, and 2. And of course, these units are poised to occupy the piers and deprive the Spanish of the batteries there. So we will place the bombardment card on that area, and we will resolve bombardment against those 2 units. And both units are at full strength, so we start with the topmost sailor unit, a 5, a 3, and a 3. Only the second die, the first 3 hits, because the range, to hit range, is increased from 2 to 3. So that unit absorbs 1 hit. Now we roll for the second sailor unit. And here all 3 batteries missed. So the only bombardment in this phase for the Spanish produces just 1 hit. And now we proceed to the British action phase, and the Spanish player can play response cards and combat cards when applicable. And now the British player can play move cards to move his units off the sea zones into adjacent land zones using the anchor symbols as guides to denote the specific land zones that they can enter. In an action phase, a player may play a combination of 2 order cards and 1 assault card, or 2 assault cards and 1 order card. And in this particular instance, the British player will play 2 move order cards and 1 assault card, and must designate the groups that will be receiving these cards. And they will play 1 move card to move that southern group into this land area here. The second move card will be used to move the units that are adjacent to the pier, and the third card, which is the assault card, will be used to move the northernmost group. Now we check the Spanish hand to see if there's any response cards they can play. The Spanish player has this card, which is an assault card, and the R means it's also a counterattack card, but the Spanish cannot counterattack or attack British units that are at sea with his block. So the Spanish player has no cards to play in response at this time. Notice that if the Spanish player still had this card, which it's discarded before, the lost card, it could play this card to move one of the groups that played a move or assault card into a different area. For example, instead of the British moving into the pier area here by play of the lost card, the group would move to some other area, like moving into the coast space here. But returning to the Spanish hand, they'd have no response cards to play. So the British move the units in this sea space into this land space, but because there's a 3-unit stacking limit, one of the British units remain in the sea space. Now it's the turn for the 2 British sailor units to move, and they move onto the pier. And finally, the British move their units in front of the San Pedro battery, and they will move through the northernmost anchor symbol to the beach space, which is connected to the symbol. And that concludes the British action phase. The British played 3 cards, so now they fill their hand with 3 new cards. Now the British sailor units, by advancing into a space by play of an assault card, they get to pick a leader and place it face down on the space where the blocks are, and they choose Fremantle. So we will place Fremantle, and he has a special ability of not getting lost when lost cards are played on his group. Will place him on top of the British blocks there. Now we move on to the Spanish action phase, where the British can play any applicable response and combat cards. Spanish player starts by playing this harassment card, and this card allows the Spanish player to remove a confusion card from his hand. He doesn't have any, but it allows him also to cause the British player to insert a confusion card into the British draw pile. So we take one of these confusion cards, and now we have to mix it with the British draw pile here. So we will shuffle the cards. And we'll see when they draw that confusion card. The Spanish player only have 1 assault card, which also doubles as a counterattack card, but the Spanish will play it for its assault capability, and this will allow an attack on a British area. So this card will be played to have these 2 Spanish units, a regular and a volunteer unit, move into the pier area. And now the Spanish player can choose 1 leader, and whenever British units move from a sea area to a land area, the British player can also place a leader with those units. So here in this group, the British player will place Hood with this group of British units here. And the British player will pick another leader for that group here that entered that beach space adjacent to the San Pablo battery, and we will place Trowbridge with that group. Because the Spanish player played an assault card, he will place this leader Guinter with the group. Guinter gives the Spanish one additional die in attack and defense. And now we have a combat situation to resolve. And we will be using the battle board. Here we see the units of both sides placed in the middle space. Let's take a closer look. We see the attacking Spanish have a volunteer and a regular unit, and the defending British have 2 sailor units. And of course each side has 1 leader. Fremantle provides no modification or additional die rolls in attack or defense, but the Spanish leader Guinter, he does provide 1 die on attack. But first, we go to the first combat round and we mark it here. The first step is for the attacker to decide if he's going to play a combat support card. Those are the cards that have the C symbol. The Spanish have 1 combat support card, but this card can only be used in defense to subtract 1 die from the attacker. So the Spanish have no combat support cards to play. The British will use 1 combat support card, which is this artillery card that adds 1 die to the total number of dice that they will be rolling. Now we calculate the number of dice that each side will roll, and each side begins with a base die of 1. And the side with the higher number of strength points in the combat receives an additional die, but both sides have 7 strength points, so that doesn't apply. Now there's 1 additional die for each unit of Royal Marines or regulars present in combat. The Spanish have 1 unit of regulars, so that adds 1 more die for the Spanish side. That would be -1 die if the attacker's units crossed a red line border. That doesn't apply. Now we add or subtract dice depending on combat support cards played. The British played the cannon combat support card, so they add 1 die. And then 1 die if any officer provides that bonus, and the Spanish officer Guinter does. So the Spanish will end up rolling 3 dice and the British 2 dice. And hits will occur on 5s and 6s, and we roll simultaneously for both sides. So here we go. The Spanish rolled a 5, 4, and a 3, 1 hit, and the British a 3 and a 2, no hits. So the British have to absorb 1 hit, and they absorb it with their strongest unit, which is the leftmost sailor unit. And now both players must decide whether they will stay for a second round or they will retreat. And first, the attacker decides. So the Spanish decide to stay. A defending British who roll 1 less die will decide to stay also in hopes of rolling a 4. And in that case, if a 4 is rolled, the volunteers will flee. So we roll 3 dice for the Spanish and 2 for the British. And the Spanish roll 2 6s. That means that there's going to be 2 hits, and also a leader will suffer a casualty. And the British rolled 2 5s, so that's 2 hits inflicted on the Spanish units. So we will apply the hits on the Spanish units. The volunteers suffer 1 hit, and now they have 3 strength, just like the regulars. So now the second hit can be applied to the strongest, which is any of the 2, and it is also absorbed by the volunteers. Now the British have to absorb 2 hits. The leftmost sailor unit takes the first one, which leaves him with a strength of 2, and now the strongest unit, which is the rightmost sailor unit, absorbs the second hit. And now because a natural double 6 was rolled, We roll 1d6 to determine if the British leader Fremantle dies, and he dies on a 1 to 3. And the result is a 1, so he is eliminated, and Fremantle's counter is removed permanently from the game. And whenever a leader is eliminated from a side, that side's hand size is reduced by 1 for the rest of the game. So the British hand side now goes from 6 to 5. They have 5 cards already, so they can only fill up their hand up to 5 cards each turn for now. So that was the second round of combat. Well, we move to the third round. And after the third round, there's an attrition penalty. Each side loses 1 strength point. The Spanish will stay, but the British will be retreating. And the British can retreat to an adjacent area. And adjacent to the pier is that beach area there with the red 4. That's a murderous 4 battery bombardment range there. But they don't have a choice. They can't retreat into the sea. So the British retreat there. And because the Spanish won this battle, we slide the morale marker 1 space to the left. It's still a 0 space, but if the Spanish win another battle, they will be in the +1 box. Now the Spanish fill up their hand. They pick 3 more cards, an assault card with bombardment capability, a confusion card, and this is the swell card. That's the end of the Spanish action phase. And now we go to the end of turn phase, and the turn markers advance to the 3 o'clock space. So we've played 3 turns of Santa Cruz 1797, and that's where this video will end now. So you can see that this game, in a short amount of time, provides a very tense situation. Because it is a block game, you don't know what units you will be facing until you actually enter into combat. And the cards also can give you some surprises. British units may get lost. You may get a chunky hand of useless confusion cards. So it's the excitement of a card-driven game with the uncertainty of a block game, all in a small footprint and playable under 2 hours. And I hope that this video has given you a good idea of the flow of the game and what the game has to offer. This is Stuka Joe, signing off for now. Thanks for watching.